is we're going to finish up playing Marketing Survivor, and you're going to introduce your team names. You may, throughout the course of the semester, decide that you don't like your team members, and you're welcome to vote them off the island, and you can play your own versions of Marketing Survivor. Or you can get up and decide you don't like your group and leave and join another group. So these are not set in stone, but at least so that everybody can get credit for the 2 days that we've done now. You're welcome to change groups after today. So don't panic. You're not necessarily stuck with the people that you've got. You're welcome to change it around. If you have somebody who's being what economists refer to as a free rider, what is a free rider? Does anybody know what a free rider is?
Person that takes the benefits of other people's work.
Yeah, the person who reaps the benefits but doesn't contribute their fair share to the work. So the free rider problem in economics comes about by things like AARP. For example, AARP lobbies on behalf of old people, the Q-tips in our society. And they're going to do that whether or not you pay dues to AARP or not. So how do they get you to join AARP and support their lobbying efforts to keep Social Security and Medicare going and things like that? Well, they provide you with private benefits that overcome the free rider problem, which are things like the fact that you get a cap that says AARP, and you get discounts at hotels and travel and booking. And that's how they overcome the free rider problem. In classes and groups, it's sometimes difficult to overcome the free rider problem because you don't necessarily have the carrot or the stick that you may need in order to encourage group members to do that. So I'm giving you the opportunity to, as we go along, to vote people off the island. They can go, off and be in solitude, and that's fine. The thing that I would caution you about is that don't wait. This happens, it seems, every semester to me, that students wait until the last possible minute, like right before the group project is due, to say, little John Smith has done nothing all semester in terms of this group project. He's been miserable. He doesn't show up. He doesn't email. He refuses to participate in the Google Doc or whatever it is you decide you're going to do for your group project, which will be sort of towards the middle end of the semester in your group presentations. And at that point, there's really not a lot I can do about it, from that standpoint. So you're welcome to talk to me about these things in advance, and I encourage you to do that. But we'll start with playing Marketing Survivor. So this group, who were not here on Tuesday, all get up and individually tell you why they should not be voted off the island, and then present as a group, the first group in the Critical Thinking Challenge, to present their team name and whether or not we should just vote the entire team off the island. So we're going to do individual. We did individuals with you last time. We're going to do teams this time. So you guys get to stand up. Unfortunately, like I said, since you weren't here on Tuesday, sort of sucks to be you. But, that's what economists call opportunity costs, right? You got to sleep in a day, hang with your friends, do something else at 8 a.m., and not be here. And so, by the way, if you want to get a worthless degree that does nothing but rename things that we all know intuitively with fancy words, get a degree in economics. That's what they do. Opportunity cost. We all understand what that means. It means I want this more than that. I wanted my sleep more than I wanted to be here on Tuesday, or I wanted my money for 1 second longer, so that's why I didn't enroll in this class until Thursday or Wednesday or whenever it was you enrolled. So we'll go ahead. You guys stand up and tell us who you are, your full name, first and last, and why you shouldn't be voted off the island. And then you as a group get to present and make a marketing persuasion pitch as to how you came up with your creative name and why we should let your group stay here in the beauty of the tropics, that is Principles of Marketing at 8 a.m. at the Harvard of the Hills, Stanford of the Sticks.
Okay, my name is Itamar Mercado. I am a strong writer. I'm good at math too. I work well with others. So I'm a team player, and also I work hard. So I'm not one of those free riders.
Okay, well, you violated rule number 1. You said you worked hard, which is probably not true, but we'll let you slide since you didn't hear that on day 1.
Hi, my name is Rakesh Kumar Chaudhary, and I think I'm good at critical thinking. and I believe I can solve lots of business problems, and I'm good at mathematics,
Okay, what type of mathematics? That's a broad field.
like business mathematics,
Okay, like business calculus or business algebra or
Algebra.
accounting, okay.
accounting, and algebra.
All right,
My name is Adam Spurrier. I also put I'm a hard worker. I find that I'm good at
violation of rule number one, that's okay. We'll let it slide.
fix it next time. I'm good at regulating my time. I really like to divide up, figure out when I need to do which, so I can spread it out evenly and not have to cram it all the night before it's due. Things like that. Also, I've had a lot of experience as a currently a manager at a restaurant, good at communicating with other employees, customers, such like that. I've had a lot of practice with that over the last couple of years.
Okay, all right.
My name is Ludmilla C. Augusta, and I'm good with communication. I'm a good observer, and I like to think I have good creativity.
Okay. All right.
My name is Paul Alexander Brackney. I'm not really a hard worker. I'm good at improvising. I'm good with numbers, like math, I guess. I can do calculus, I guess, kind of. Pretty interesting. I'm good at running on very little sleep.
Did you write, I'm a hard worker on there, and you just corrected it, or you just threw
Yeah,
that
I'm
in
just gonna go
gratuitously?
ahead and admit that
You're just
I'm not
gonna,
really a hard
you're gonna
worker.
throw that in gratuitously, since I said that was rule number one, okay, all right. What do you guys think? Should they be allowed to say individually? Okay. What'd you come up with for your team name?
For our team name, we came up with Creative Communications.
Creative Communication.
Oh, so business.
Communication.
And why did you come up with that name?
Well, I figured we had several people on here that had both creativity and communication. So it kind of brought them together, but I also thought, it's important in the workplace. Communication is key, and coming up with creative solutions to any problems that may arise in that field would be important to any business. in that
Okay,
field.
all right. What do you guys think of their team name? All right, we survived marketing challenge number 2. I'm not gonna make you go on to marketing challenge number 3 since you weren't here on Tuesday, so we'll start with, let's see, which way did I start last time? This way. I started that way, so we'll start with this group, then that group. I'll give you guys a pass, then we'll do that group and that group. So let's have this group go up. Let's give their plangent answer to
Which one?
the critical thinking question. Oh, yeah, well, first of all, you gotta introduce your group and how you came up with the group name. So we can vote on that, and then we'll talk about your answer to history and marketing. Thank you.
So for our group name, our other member isn't here today, so he's not being super group name-ish.
He's slacking.
He's slacking.
Did he participate in the group name?
He actually came up with the group name.
Okay, so
So
he
he
wasn't a free rider in this.
No, he
He's just not
wasn't.
here today.
He's just not here today. So he came up with the name Superfly, which I kind of like because like our motto is like keeping everything going straight and not backtracking, like making sure we get all our work done on time and like no legwork. And then for a company, like say we were a company, making sure all our products were out on time and like no backlashes or making sure that nothing was like back ordered or what's the word, or like nobody didn't like it and we kept it like on a straight line. We didn't stray and try to do multiple things at once. If we had like one product, make sure that one product is doing as best as possibly can.
What do you guys think of the team name? Got creative enough? Okay,
And then so then we do this.
now your answer to the more difficult question, is marketing history important?
As a group, we came at the thing saying marketing history is very important because we came to a conclusion that you got to learn from past mistakes, and so we put examples on that, like where companies made mistakes. So, like for one example, EA Sports, I was telling him earlier, to like promote a game, Godfather 2, they actually sent out like real brass knuckles to people who were like being a part of the game, but brass knuckles are actually illegal. And so they, as a company, actually sent out an illegal product to its consumers, which isn't very smart because, like, the company doesn't know which like the type of people that they are. So they could have used that to like put, paint on someone or use it in a different example. So that was probably a marketing fail right there. Another marketing fail that the Zorno Pizza did. So back in like 2014 when Ray Rice, that video came of him in the elevator like beating up his girlfriend. There was a thing on Twitter, a hashtag, like people like women saying why they stayed or why didn't they stay, basically explaining like the domestic abuse relationships they were in and like the reasons why they left or stayed. Or DiGiorno actually tweeted something not knowing what why I stayed hashtag actually meant, and they said hashtag why I stayed, you had pizza. And so that was like, we felt like that was terrible, right? We felt like that was a very bad marketing fail because they didn't understand what they were saying. They were just trying to say the reason why I stayed in because I had fresh, oven pizza. So they definitely misled the hashtag and wasn't like very smart knowing the situation and what the big events of that time were going on. And then the third one was the third? Oh, yeah, and so the next thing, a company out of Texas, it was a woman who owned a mattress company, and she actually used 9/11 to promote her mattress deals. And so I really feel like that isn't smart using, U.S. Disasters as a promoting, like she said, like the Twin Tower mattress promotion, something like that as a thing. And I tried to watch the ad, but it was actually taken off of YouTube. So that might have told you something. That's why it's like, I wouldn't use 9/11 or any, U.S. disaster in a situation to promote your own business. And so, and we would have never known that if we didn't look into like the previous history of marketing. So we really feel like you have to learn from people's mistakes so you don't make those same mistakes in the future.
So let me ask you about the hashtag.
Yes.
You argue that that's important, but hashtag and doing that is a relatively modern phenomenon. I mean, how do you really learn from past mistakes when nobody in, let's say 1920 was doing hashtag because they didn't have the wonderful world of the internet.
Right. And so like we felt like there's a different way of putting it. Like you got to know like the big events that are happening on in the U.S. right now. Like maintain like something like terrible happens, or like if a video pops up of a guy hitting a girl, like that would bring up like certain points. And so like we said, like as a company, you got to either like keep your company's name out of it or like know what you're putting into it. And so like that, it doesn't have to be just for hashtags, and basically for like all social media platforms. And yeah, social media is kind of a new thing, but still like it's been around for like a little bit now. And so I feel still like that's still kind of in the past. I mean, it's not, as late as the 1920s, like you said, but still like knowing what's going on in the US and like what are the big events that are happening with each other. You should know like if you need to put your name in on it or your name, keep it out of it and do your own thing.
Okay, so with that, I was listening to this morning on NPR. Gillette did a commercial that basically is an acknowledgement of the Me Too. Now, Gillette historically has been, with regard to their men's razor line, very masculine, dominant, oriented themes. And now they're picking up on this hashtag Me Too movement and be the best man you can be, basically, by not engaging in what we might describe as brutish behavior. And they're facing backlash from people who are saying it's basically, reverse discrimination against men.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I watched the video about it and everything.
How do you feel about that?
I feel like the points they were talking about are like true, like it's different times, like what their big thing is, like they said in the thing, like men are men and men do men things. And
that was always their
thing. So like, I kind of like, to me, that kind of puts like their credibility on the line. So like, they've always been like a manly company. And so why the reason now, like you fall back on all the stuff that you said in the previous years that they've been such a manly company. I agree with their movement, but I disagree on how they did it.
Okay.
They're trying to save face.
Yeah, they're trying to save face exactly without.
One of the things that you might think is that, for example, society change. I mean, like people are giving a backlash to this now, but it could, I guess, if you think about it in terms of short return on investment versus long-term ROI. Disney was way out in front and got a lot of backlash for being very supportive of the LGBTQ community. 20 years ago, Disney was on that bandwagon, right? I mean, they had gay days They weren't official days at Disney, but they actually were on that, but they didn't stop them. They, acknowledged that they were there, and they were very, and now I don't think anybody thinks, at the time, Pat Robertson got on and said, let's boycott Disney. And Disney basically stood strong and said, we're gonna do this, recognizing that that's a huge base of people that may enjoy their products and services, and they have an enormous amount of disposable income or discretionary income. So, okay, what do you guys think? Good answer? All right, so I will tell you, you have the opportunity, if you've read the syllabus, there are opportunities to win bonus points for exceptional answers. I will tell you, I'll do this in advance, but I would have thought it would have been obvious. Saying history is important is probably the easy, low-hanging fruit answer. The harder answer is, the one that wins bonus points is probably the history and important answer. That's harder to justify, maybe. All right, so I said this group would go next, right?
Yeah.
By the way, for those of you who came in today and weren't here last time, this is broadcast live on YouTube. So if you're in the witness protection program, you might as well just start running.
So I guess I'll just kind of read our paragraph. Our name is the Formidable Sellers, though.
The what?
Formidable. That's what it's formidable.
Formidable. I was going to say formidable. Okay. What, you're selling with cocaine or what? Okay, so be formidable.
Okay. So,
Sellers?
yeah.
Okay.
Sellers. The death of history is slowly approaching. However, it is useful to have an understanding of marketing's history so we can learn from mistakes and better our techniques. The internet has been transformational in the process of learning about history. We can now find information from a Google search instead of just like going to the library, looking at books, articles, etc. So I guess we kind of only had a couple sentences, so I guess we can each elaborate on our own thoughts.
Okay, so let me ask you first of all, before you do that. You said that we are experiencing the death of history.
It's slowly approaching.
Okay,
Yes.
what does that mean? It's slowly approaching.
I think like our generation is losing interest and like actually wanting to go find the information, just because like we can find only what we need instead of like searching and having to read through a lot more, and we can just get to like exactly what we want to know.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that your generation, and this is one of the phenomena that we know is happening with the generation, is you don't go past that first three things on the search engine. You don't dig. I mean, how many of you actually have gone to a second page of a search engine search? No one has actually gone to a second page. Okay, all right. So what you're saying is that from a practicing standpoint, we're experiencing the death of history.
Yeah, because it's definitely still a requirement in the like colleges and like public schools.
But you just don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, I know I didn't do well in those classes. I don't know about everybody else.
Okay. All right. So on your examples of which started with the first example, what was
Yes,
it?
the first example would just be using the internet.
Okay, using the internet.
Yep.
So you can go and you can find things instantly
Yeah, and yeah.
on your phone. Okay. All right. What was the second example?
Another example would just be like how marketing has changed over like the course of 50 years. We market a lot different than how we used to. So we could look up certain scenarios that might not actually help us in like the current state we're in, but there are still some that could help us out. So I think that's another reason why it could be dying.
Okay. So like from a substantive example, how did they market, would you guess, since you weren't alive then, in 1950? What was the biggest way that people marketed? Newspaper. What's happening to newspapers? Billboards. Newspapers are dying, right? And they're except for the failing New York Times, as Donald Trump calls them. They're local newspapers. Little towns all used to have newspapers. How many little towns have lost their newspaper because they're not viable anymore? So how are we marketing now?
Using the internet, I would say mostly like social media, and then as well as like roadside.
Even with social media, like, there's banners on there, but we just click through it because that's not what we're looking for.
You
It's
just
getting in the
totally,
way.
you just totally ignore the ad.
Yeah, like, that's not what I wanna look at, so.
Is there a substitute for a newspaper online now?
I mean, there's blogs, people look at blogs,
Yeah,
but
and
I
that-
don't think it's that, seems to.
Yeah, there kind of is. I mean, there are community blogs now that are popping up, and they're sort of organically forming. It's the medium in which we're transmitting the knowledge has changed, but not necessarily the knowledge itself. We're using the internet, but it's not, I mean, we've lost papers, but now people are forming. So for example, in my own local community, I'm from Guthrie, which is 15 miles north of here. For those of you who are Oklahoma born, you should know what Guthrie is because it was the first state capital in Oklahoma and the territorial capital. We were founded in April 22nd, 1889 in one day, and something called the Land Run. For those of you who are from Oklahoma, this should come back to you at some point in time. But we've lost we've got a newspaper, it's just not very relevant anymore. But there is a news page now with a blog on there, and they're keeping it going by selling, ads and locals, and people actually do click on it and read. So I think the big media company is gone, which used to be Don Ray Media, but it's been replaced by something. Now, where you have problems is with generations that are not technologically advanced or individuals that are not technologically and can't get that information. Okay, what do you guys think of their answer? All right. We have two groups over there, is that right? We'll start with the back group.
Okay, so for our group name, we chose The Breakfast Club. Obviously, it's a classic, it's not original, but
And you've actually seen the movie,
yes.
all of you.
Best one-liner movie ever.
So you just let them choose your name off of something that you have no idea about whatsoever.
He kind of explains what it was about to me.
They kind of explained what it was about. Okay, all right.
That's what Google's for.
I see. Okay. Did you watch clips from it? No. And you didn't watch The Breakfast Club?
No.
It was actually our other group member's idea, he's not here today.
Okay.
But we chose The Breakfast Club because.
Have you seen The Breakfast Club?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
okay, because we all have such different skill sets that we're bringing to the table that together as a whole, we're complete in that way.
Okay. So for those of you who have not seen, how many of you in this class have not seen The Breakfast Club, the movie? Have no idea what it's about?
Come on.
Tell them what The Breakfast Club is about.
Pretty much there's like a group of people and they all get attention and then they're like an unlikely group of friends, they're like on completely different sides of the spectrum and then they become friends and they have a good time. That's kind of.
Okay, all right.
I'm sure there's a deeper meaning, but that's what I got out of the movie.
That's what you got out of the movie. Who stars in it? Molly Ringwald. Okay, I'm dating myself. Go ahead. What do you guys think of their answer to their critical thinking challenge for the group name? Okay, they're safe on that one.
Okay, so for our critical thinking challenge, we're
With
not.
history, this is the
Yes.
third one, right? Okay.
Yes. So marketing is a constantly changing field, and because of this, it's crucial to know what to expect in the present and future. But at the same time, you always need to remember where you came from. So we actually had 3 points, but we feel like people are trying to work smarter, not harder. And since things are constantly changing and developing, people really need to focus on the present and the future. And like you said, social media doesn't go back that far. So you can't really look at what our, founding fathers did in marketing for that sort of thing. So you really just need to see what's currently happening and go on with that.
Okay, all right, so the temporal limitations of social media. What about the idea that good communication, though, although the medium has changed, is still good communication?
I think communication has definitely changed a lot because, people aren't great at face-to-face confrontation as well as they used to be. So that's part of our remember where you came from. We're not entirely on one side or the other of the spectrum, but we definitely feel like
Okay, all right, so even with regard to, I mean, you can make it a creative argument, even with regard to communication itself has changed. When I was, and I'm from a generational perspective, I'm what's called a Gen Xer. Some of you are even beyond millennials, you're now Gen Y is what they've sort of labeled you, depending on when you were born. But even among Gen Xers who are earlier Gen Xers, my brother is a late Gen Xer, one of the things that was more static was language. And good writing was more static. What is acceptable now has become much more fluid as a result of what? Texting. Because people don't actually text and complete. It used to be that if you put together ads and things like that, you had complete ideas, right? But now you've got, everybody's on a, 120 character limit, which by the way, if you want to communicate with me, like you get instant responses, you can text me. I prefer to text. I prefer if you keep it under 140 characters, because I don't need your life story. So, all right, what do you guys think their answer on history? One more group, and then we'll have one group that goes on Tuesday.
All right, so for our group name, we picked Fortis, which means the strong in Latin. And we picked that because we like having a strong relationship with our customers, but then in the community.
Okay.
So
How'd you come up with a Latin name?
we were just trying to think of something, and we were just kind of like, I don't know.
And you're like, Latin, that's out there. Let's just do that. Let's use the dead language. Nobody will know what it means. We can make it anything we want. Is that it?
Yeah, well, we got to, and I don't know. We kind of just, we were just brainstorming, and then I was kind of like, well, I don't know, a different language would be kind of cool, and then I don't know if you've ever seen Gladiator.
Okay.
That's one of the
Or, because like for his on his arm, it's SPQR and it's the screen, but they use them.
Okay. All right.
And then for our challenge question.
Okay, well, what did you think of the name?
It's possible.
Okay.
All right. We believe it's important for marketing students to understand the history. So like you can use past trends and patterns to like kind of forecast for the future and know what you need to do and what you don't need to do.
Okay, now I think that is an important point. That yes, the past is in many instances prologue. Even if you take history as being anything, the start of this class is near history, but it is now at this point history. We started at 8 o'clock and we're now at 9:54, right? And so that is, and yeah, businesses are gonna have to use history and forecasting, at least short-term history, right? At least near history. When you look at what your product demand is, it probably follows certain cycles, depending on what you're selling. Many things are seasonal, for example, and so you're gonna have to be able to know at least recent history with regard to when you're gonna put out. Why is it that Walmart, the day I was in Walmart on January 2nd, and what was Walmart doing?
Putting out alcohol.
They're putting out alcohol, yeah, that's gonna be every day now, because once we pass that wonderful new, referendum that allows you to get real beer, not just near beer in the grocery stores and wine, they've now added a whole new section. But the day after New Year's, Walmart was putting out Valentine's stuff. Why is that?
The next big thing,
It's the next, and how do they know that?
because
It's past year's history suggests that people start thinking about the next thing.
And you'll probably also want to be the first person to put it out there.
Right, And you, I mean, you've got it wrapped up. If you're the first one that, if you have your cards out there first, people buy their cards or whatever, for their insignificant other. As they're walking down the aisle at Walmart. You got yours out before Walgreens does. And, you've made that sale on that cheap piece of paper.
I do feel like Walgreens has better cards though.
Walgreens does have better cards. Sometimes, yeah. All right.
So yeah, basically just kind of using past trends and stuff, and you can use the past to understand how to build a better future for your company, and like use your different past marketing ventures. Like say you try billboards one time and it doesn't work, and you know to try electronic examples for the future, just different things like that. And so basically we just said having the knowledge about the history of marketing allows marketing students to realize what techniques will and will not work for the current situation.
Okay. All right. What do you guys think? All right, very good. This group, I will give you until Tuesday to come up with a plangent answer so that you can get full credit for that. Those will be due after midnight on Tuesday, so I'll give you some time. I give you time in class, so you should be able to fully or get most of it fleshed out before and not have to do a whole lot of homework. But I give you that option to go back in case you want to try and get those bonus points for that. So we need to talk about, obviously, the question I ask leads into my discussion on, I do think that a history of marketing is important. Even though we have, as we discussed in here through the Critical Thinking Challenge, a lot of new ways of marketing. And it's changing enormously quickly. If we went back to the 1950s, nobody who was a marketer could have ever thought about the internet. And now the internet is actually becoming quaint and sort of archaic in terms of marketing, because what are we doing now? It's not just internet marketing, but it's what? What are we gonna have to do now in terms of marketing? How do you access the internet for most of you now?
Cell phone.
You access it, so mobile marketing is now, I mean, that's a subfield of basically internet marketing, and it's a combination of technologies. And so we have these changing trends, but I would argue that, yes, the history is important. And one of the things that you see is you can get ideas from past things that were successful and apply them to new technologies and new situations. And you see basically old types of philosophies, and I'll give you examples of these, being used by even the most cutting edge of companies, and for a variety of reasons. So we divide the history of marketing up into eras, and those eras correspond to philosophies. Now, I will tell you that I did not start out as a marketing professor. This was my second academic career. I actually started out in the college that I make merciless fun of now across the parking lot. And those of you who are here on Tuesday heard me refer to it as the land of hippy dippy or liberal arts. That's actually where I started out. My bachelor's and my master's degree are in political science. I got a Juris Doctor's degree, and I was actually a political scientist and a legal studies professor. And then I went and got a marketing degree much later in life and became a marketing professor. And so I like philosophy, and obviously as a political scientist, I liked history. And so most of my research in marketing is focused on a combination of those disciplines, from political science and history and its application to marketing. And so marketing as an academic discipline is a relatively new phenomenon. Now, we don't know when the first societies started, but we do know that once they did start, they began to market. So marketing as an activity has ancient origins, but as an academic discipline, it's a product of the early 20th century. And we see marketing departments forming at colleges and universities at about the beginning of the early 1900s or the 20th century. So what I say is that for most of recorded history, and that's when we become a civilization, and again, we don't know when that first civilization occurred, we have echoes of those civilizations in a number of historic texts. For example, in the Greek stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey, we have echoes of those ancient civilizations and this beginning of the formation of what we call the modern mind. You see it in the Upanishads in the Eastern tradition, and you also see it in the Christian tradition in the Bible, right? This awakening, and where you find it, if we were to look at where society begins to form in the Bible, anybody want to guess? I'll give you 5 points to get the chapter correct. Five bonus points.
Genesis?
Yeah, you find it in Genesis, right? Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden and they're happy and they're content. But they don't consider themselves distinct and separate from the cosmos. And it isn't until you get the fall from grace and then having to suffer that you get societal formation, right? This need to form societies and work and actually market, right? So you get it in Genesis, in the Bible. So from that point forward until about 1920, what we have is we call the production era, which is goods are relatively scarce. I know for most of you this is hard to fathom, but even 50 years ago, there just weren't a lot of things to buy. There are lots of different products and things to buy now, and the most important word in marketing today may be differentiation. Everything is differentiated. Even the most commoditized of goods is differentiated. When I was a kid growing up, and I'm 45, I'll tell you that, I'm a millennial. I know, that's old.
That's not, I'm laughing because you think that's so old.
Huh?
I'm laughing because you think
Oh,
that it's
well,
so
I'm
old.
your parents' age, right? So I remember the first time I had one of my high school's friends' kids in my class. I've been here for 25 years. I taught here at the Harvard of the Hills for 25 years. This student comes up to me and she says, Dr. Geary, and I was a political scientist at the time. She says, I think you went to high school with my parents. I'm like, no, I'm far too young. And she's like, yeah, you're from Guthrie, right? I'm like, yeah. I talked to my parents and they said they knew you. I'm like, no, not
Nice.
somebody else. She comes back with my senior yearbook. She's like, you took my mom to prom. And I looked at her and I suggested that it was unimportant whether or not she liked me. What was important from her grade standpoint was whether or not I liked her, and I didn't like her at that point in time because I think I'm far too young to even have children. But when I was, back in the dark ages when I was growing up, there was this product that everybody drank called milk. And if you went to the grocery store when I was a kid, I was born in 1973, and so in the 80s when I would go to the grocery store, there was basically two types of milk in the grocery store. There was whole milk and skim milk. There wasn't 2% milk or 1% milk. There sure as hell wasn't soy milk. That's some communist inferior product. And I have no idea what almond, there aren't even almonds really in almond milk. They're just, the amount of almonds in a gallon of almond milk is just de minimis.
What about skim milk?
Skim milk, yeah, it was low fat. That's what they called low fat. They didn't have skim milk. Now, what do you have in the grocery store? You go to the grocery store, you've got whole milk, you've got 2% milk, 1% milk, skim milk, almond milk, soy milk. You've got lactose-free milk because most people are slightly lactose intolerant. And so you still like that. Cereal sucks with water. And it doesn't taste real good with soy milk either. I got news for you. You want real milk, but you have this problem that you're like the guy on, how many of you have seen Barbershop 2 where Cedric the Entertainer is on the train and he says, what kind of coffee is that? And the guy says it's chai with soy, right? And he says, oh, you're lactose intolerant like me. And it's a great scene if you're not, and that's a great scene. But if you like real milk, this lactose free, this is highly differentiated. We didn't have that in the past. Things were simpler. You didn't have a whole lot of choices back in the day. And so people would buy your stuff. Cause it was just better than the alternative, which was nothing. If I have eggs, now, again, when I was growing up, eggs were eggs. You went to the store and if you want eggs, the only variety in eggs was basically whether or not you got large or extra large eggs. That was it. Now you got medium, large, extra large, and jumbo eggs. You've got brown eggs. You've got cage-free eggs. You've got range-free eggs. You've got organic eggs, right? I mean, there were eggs when I was a kid. You got eggs. You went to the store and, I remember the first time the grocery store in my hometown started carrying brown eggs. Nobody wanted brown eggs. What's good with brown egg? Which one? Yeah. So now there's all these different, now there's egg substitutes. You can get egg beaters. You can get egg whites, just that have been separated out. So you've got all of these differentiations. That didn't used to be the case. So for most of human history, if I had something and you needed it, and you had something that I needed, we could trade. If you had a sheep and I had eggs, I might want your wool so I could have a sweater, and you may want eggs. So we'd trade wool for eggs. And it was fairly easy. So this era can be summed up by one line, and this philosophy of this era can be summed up by one line from a very ancient movie now that some of you have probably seen. If you're a sports fanatic, you have seen this film, even though it's really, really old. It's called Field of Dreams, and it stars anybody now? Kevin Costner. And what's the one line takeaway from Field of Dreams?
If you build it, they will
If
come.
you build it, they will come. The production era can be summed up as if you build it, they will come. If you have a product out there, people will buy it. And that was true. Now, there are still companies that use this philosophy. Apple under Steve Jobs used a production philosophy. Steve Jobs did nothing that we would resemble today as being modern, contemporary marketing. Steve Jobs' attitude was, you don't know what you want. I'm going to tell you what you want, and you will buy it. And by and large, we did. They did no market testing. Nothing that we would tell you is good marketing practice did Steve Jobs do at Apple. He basically said, I'm going to come out with this way of, it started with music.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you a new way to deliver, because the old ways of getting music really sucked. I can remember, and now people are going back because your generation sort of has some nostalgia for the past in history. And so people are actually buying vinyl records and they're buying record players.
They hang up on walls.
Yeah, well, and they're actually buying record players to play. There are bars now, sort of hipster bars, that are, a lot of my stories, by the way, will be about drinking. I'm a lawyer, I was a lawyer first, and so, you learn to drink in law school. And there are these bars down on 23rd Street that are opening up, new bars full of people your ages that have record players in them. I'm just, they were delicate and fragile and awful things, to deal with when you were growing up. Tapes were a much better product. You didn't have to, you could take it in your car. It was smaller. It was easier to find the song that you wanted, things like that. Then CDs came out, and that was supposed to be really great because you could scratch it and it wouldn't, records scratched, it was gone. That wasn't really all that true. But they came up with, Steve Jobs was not the first one to come up with digitized music, but he was the first one to really bring to market a product that allowed you to play that music, shuffle it. One of the things that was a pain about tape decks was that, and even CDs, was that you couldn't just scroll through and see the songs. Now you've got this face and you've got the iPod. And so he said, I'm going to tell you what's cool, and it's going to be called an iPod, and we're going to put it out there. And then he came out with the iPhone and the iPad, and we bought it up. But he didn't do anything that resembled, testing out a product, seeing if people had a demand for it, wanted it. He just put it out there. That's a production philosophy. Microsoft operates on a production. They force out new versions of Windows that are even more crappy than the old versions of Windows. And we buy it because why? Well, it's the new thing, and most operating systems on these boxes that we still use rely on that operating system, that OS, that platform. And so even though this is a very ancient, philosophy in marketing, you see companies that are tech companies that still rely on this. We're going to tell you what it is that's cool. Developers online come up with, I can tell you that the guy who started YouTube didn't do any marketing, really. They just said, I think it'd be kind of cool if we use this web thing to allow people to broadcast themselves or post videos that they like. And they put it up there now. Who owns YouTube now? It's bought by, who owns YouTube?
Amazon? Elon Musk.
Google. Google owns YouTube, right? And those are examples of people just thinking, maybe this will work, and people using it. And some of these platforms are not used. There's a whole generation of social media stars that have arisen, and a lot of them started out on a platform that's now dead that you all probably don't even remember, never heard of, called Vine. Gone.
They're all YouTubers now.
They're Logan Paul and all those people have gotten onto YouTube and making it close, which is why I'm doing it, so that I'll become rich with my YouTube channel someday or something. I don't know. It's also a convenient way if you miss class to be able to see what we did. So a lot of it was barter. If you build it, they will come. In the 1920s, we get what's called the sales era. What we have is, so you start out with Henry Ford decides to take this novelty, which is called the car. Most people rode around on horses. In that day, cars were expensive. They were novelties. He decides to take this idea and make a manufacturing process that allows everybody, the everyday man, to buy a car. And so he comes out with the first mass-produced automobile, which was called the Model T. And the saying was you could have a Model T in any color that you wanted, so long as that color was black. They only came in one color, black. That was it. You wanted a Model T, and why did you want a Model T? Well, it was better than a horse. Horses die. You have to feed them. They might buck you off. I like horses. I own horses. I've bred and shown and trained and done horses all my life.
I've shown horses.
So if you like that, you have an instant name. Just kidding. But I grew up on a farm, always had horses. I like them, but I can tell you that when I had to get here at 7 o'clock this morning, I wouldn't have wanted to have gotten here from Guthrie on a horse, because I would have had to have started out last night to get here in time, and that wouldn't have been a whole hell of a lot of fun in the rain and the cold. And so, now you've got this thing that's got a roof over your head, and you can have it any color you want, but as long as that color is black. Why did people accept a black car? Well, it was better than a horse. How many of you want a black car today?
How many of us want one?
Yeah, how many of you have a black car and want a black car? Instant F. I make instant judgments about students, whether I like you or not. Black cars are miserable in Oklahoma. Why?
The heat.
The heat is one thing, and we also have this wonderful stuff called
Dust.
Oklahoma red clay, which you wash your beautiful black car, and 30 seconds later, you have an Oklahoma dust storm, and it's covered in red dust. Why? Nobody wants a black car. What color should you have? What's the only acceptable color in Oklahoma? White. It reflects all of those heat colors, but no. Most people don't want, not everybody wants a white car. Some people want black cars. So what happens? Dodge comes along, the Dodge brothers come along, they enter the market, they start producing more stuff. Now you get more competition, and so you start having to sell. So now it's no longer a matter of if you build it, they will come. Now you're going to have to go out and find people that want to buy your stuff. And so we get the sales era. Now, a lot of people have very negative, when we talk about our sales program here at UCO, people say, I want to do sales, because they have this image in their mind, and it comes from this era of what a salesman is. And that image is basically, for those of you who have ever been on a used car lot, it's that, or Mathis Brothers, right? Go to Mathis Brothers, and those people are like, they're like vultures. They descend upon you and are on you, right? I'm out of time, so we will pick up with this next time. You guys have got to remind me because you'll have to do things that you get full credit. You'll have until Tuesday. For those of you who have, the stuff from your groups, if you don't have your stuff from your group.
Yeah, he's not here today.
You all bring it next time and we will put the groups together on D2L so that I can then allow you to drop stuff in the Dropbox, all right?
Is the paragraph thing open for her to drop it into yet, or?
It should be, but it won't. The groups won't have been set up yet.
Okay.
Since you don't have yours, so just wait until Tuesday.
Wait till Tuesday to do it? Okay, that makes it easier. What horses did you use to show?
I've shown a lot. I've bred